Hello, thanks for streaming with us. I'm Terry Moran here with some of the top stories we're watching today. The CDC says new studies show vaccines still dramatically reduce the risk of hospitalization and death, even against the Delta variant, remaining 86 to 87% effective at preventing hospitalizations. Meanwhile, at least 19 Republican governors are threatening to challenge President Biden's new vaccine requirements in court, many calling it unconstitutional government overreach. But the president is firing back, telling them to have at it.
Look, I am so disappointed that particularly some of the Republican governors have been so cavalier with the health of these kids, so cavalier with the health of their communities. We're playing for real here. This isn't a game. And I don't know of any scientist out there in this field that doesn't think it makes considerable sense to do the 6 things I've suggested.
The latest ABC News and Washington Post poll shows that 9 in 10 unvaccinated adults oppose workplace vaccine mandates, and fewer than 2 in 10 unvaccinated workers say they would comply with one. Meanwhile, the Department of Homeland Security announced it is doubling fines for travelers who won't wear masks in airports and on planes and trains. The move comes amid a surge of air rage incidents. The FAA says it has received nearly 4,200 reports of unruly passengers since the start of the year, more than 3,000 of which involved people who refused to wear a mask. And a chartered plane has landed in Qatar after evacuating foreigners from Afghanistan, the second such flight to be allowed to take off from the Kabul airport since U.S. troops pulled out. And the city of Philadelphia announced it has welcomed a total of more than 11,000 Afghan refugees since the evacuation efforts began. And they're showing a little brotherly love to U.S. allies in a desperate situation. And coming up, Diane Macedo joins me live from Ground Zero with a special edition of The Breakdown on the day before the 20th anniversary of 9/11. We'll hear from survivors, from first responders, and from family members who lost loved ones as we look back at that tragic day in just a moment.
We just got a report in that there's been some sort of explosion at the World Trade Center in New York City.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of us soon. USA! USA! USA!
Hello, everyone. Welcome to The Breakdown. I'm Terry Moran.
And I'm Diane Macedo, live from Ground Zero in New York City, one day ahead of the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. You can see behind me the memorial here of 9/11. People are now gathered around what were the footprints of the Twin Towers that collapsed that day. On the walls around each tower footprint are the names of the thousands of people who died that day. And tomorrow, as is the case every year on the anniversary of 9/11, we will hear those names read aloud. And Terry, I need to point out the weather today because so many commented on what a beautiful morning it was here on 9/11/2001 before those 2 planes crashed into the Twin Towers. And today it is a very similar picture, barely a cloud in the sky, which feels both special and also a little bit eerie.
It must. It was a glorious September day, marred forever. And for nearly 20 years, we have kept in our hearts the people who are forever linked by 9/11, the survivors, the heroes, and the families who lost loved ones. World News Tonight anchor David Muir has retraced that fateful day, all of the lives that intersected, and their hope for this country 20 years later.
The morning of 9/11 It was warm, it was clear skies, it was a beautiful fall.
It was a clear, beautiful morning.
Yeah, it was. I would walk past the fire department, and so I could say hi to the firemen that I would see all the time.
You were making breakfast for the girls in the kitchen.
I was. We had gotten up early. It was Anna Claire's first day of preschool.
I'm Diane Sawyer, and it's Tuesday, September 11th, 2001.
I turned on the television to watch the news.
This was your second day on the job?
My second day on the job, yes. Reporting to the Pentagon for work. Started out like a regular day.
They are the stories of 9/11, forever linked by what happened that day.
This is at the World Trade Center, and there has been some sort of explosion. We don't fully know the details. There is one report that a plane has hit the World Trade Center.
17 minutes later, the South Tower.
The plane hit one floor above you.
Yeah. And I realized if I had stayed up there, I would have been dead. What caught my attention was the fact that people that I knew were 100 plus stories up were hanging outside of the window. And I watched them. They were making a sign of the cross, holding hands, and jumping. To me, those people were heroes.
Of the last 25 people out of the South Tower, Florence was number 18. We have followed her for nearly 20 years, and we will never forget seeing those reflecting pools for the first time.
Wow.
The names of the fallen etched in bronze, and Florence's friend, Jill Moore Campbell.
I always remember Jill's smile. I try never to think about the way she died. As a company, we were very, very close. We all knew Jill.
And now, 20 years later,
a phone call from Jill's son.
Oh, I was so happy to talk to him.
You know, it was extraordinarily moving to actually hear about this phone call from Florence. We followed her, as I mentioned, for nearly 20 years now, but we had no idea that 20 years later she received this phone call from a young man named Jake, who simply said to Florence, "What can you tell me about my mom?" Because Florence was the last person to see her alive. And Florence talks about the burden of having survived this when so many of her colleagues and friends, loved ones did not survive, that it's been quite a burden for 20 years, and that she realizes now that she's here to share this story, to make sure the next generation knows what this country went through 20 years ago. And I said to Florence, you know, you talk about the burden, but was that a gift to hear from Jake? And she said it was a gift to hear from him. Then we go and find Jake, and Jake says it wasn't me who gave the gift. It was Florence who gave the gift to me, telling me about my mom. And it's an extraordinary part of this hour tonight, Diane, and I hope everybody will watch not only the hour, the day that changed America, but the hour that comes right after with Diane Sawyer, the children of 9/11. It is moving. It is inspiring to hear from all of these courageous and brave Americans. And it'll make us all think about what we can do to try to capitalize and remember and build on that common humanity when we all came together 20 years ago. Is there anything we all can do now for our friends, for our communities? I think you'll be inspired. Diane.
I bet we will. David Muir, thank you for that. And as David mentioned, you can see more of his reporting on a special edition of 2020 tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern on ABC. Now, after 20 years, experts are still working to identify victims of the 9/11 attacks. Just this week, 2 more victims were identified by DNA technology, but hundreds more families are still waiting for closure. So let's go to ABC News Chief Investigative Reporter Josh Margolin and former NYPD Chief of Detectives Bob Boyce, now an ABC News contributor, for more on that. And Josh, I want to start with you. How has this investigation evolved over the years to try to put the pieces together of what happened here and who died here?
Look, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner, the city's coroner's office, they announced and said they were dedicated from the day the towers fell to identifying as many of the victims as they possibly could. And it's almost half the victims they've never found remains. You know, it's really, the science is terrible. You know, the buildings came down, tremendous physical force. A lot of the victims were pulverized terribly in the collapse, and the small fragments of remains were damaged by fire, damaged by jet fuel. But you have a small core of people, forensic medical examiners, that have been working on this every single week for 20 years to try to identify people. And just this week, one woman and one man, their families finally learned that it was positively identified that they were there and died in the attacks.
And to so many of those people, that closure is everything.
Absolutely.
And Bob, the New York Police Department was called on to do such extraordinary things like the New York Fire Department and others. You were in the NYPD back then. What do you remember from that day and the days that followed?
Terry, we talked about earlier about the outstanding weather. As I walked out this morning, I saw, it was a beautiful day. You could not bring everything back in the snap of a finger, exactly how that was. It was a primary day. It was Tuesday. It was a warm day, driving to work, hearing the calls over the radio, flipping the lights on your car and jamming that gas pedal to get to work as fast as you can. Then coming up on the elevated Buckner Expressway and seeing the buildings aflame, then trying to get down there as fast as you can. And it was just total chaos from there on in. And I remember working 12-hour days every day till sometime that December. That's how incredibly hard it was. And we're just flying by the seat of our pants. Makeshift morgue situations on bodies and body parts, things you'll never see again. Hope to God you never see again. So it all comes flaming back into your mind as I went to Memorial Mass today and saw some of the people I worked with there. And remembering walking around there, feeling the taste from airborne particulates in your mouth, and the terrible time we're in. So all this comes flooding back every year, and you step back and it's 20 years, and you see that the same yeoman type work being done by the OCME's office, trying as DNA technology advances, more and more people will be identified, bringing more and more solace to families, and that's what this is all about. We're not stopping 20 years of something to take stock of things. But think of it now as this labor that we're going through to help those families out.
And Bob, it's a scene we hope you and your colleagues never have to see again. And Josh, you say in some ways the politics and the wars kind of obscured what happened here that day. What do you mean by that?
You know, in the run-up in preparation for the anniversary, we met with a lot of families of victims and survivors. And one story really stood out. You know, we went down to the memorial with the grown daughter, now grown, of the only female New York City police officer who died that day in the attacks, Moira Smith. And her daughter, Patricia, said that she wants to tell the story. She wants her friends to hear about it because she feels that so much of the politics and so much of the shouting that's in our society right now, and of course the wars and all of the other stuff that's out there has really obscured the fact that on this beautiful day, 20 years ago, 3,000 people went to work, and just as regular people do, and they disappeared, many of them, from the face of the earth, never to be heard from again. And they were not warriors. They didn't enlist in the military. They were lawyers and stockbrokers and assistants and office managers and custodial staff and servers at the Windows on the World restaurant. And they just, and I think that is something that we've heard a lot from these families. They just want people to remember what actually happened. Stop shouting and remember the day.
And a terrible day, and a day that really marks a change in our country. Bob, there's a before and an after for each one of us. And for how we do things. How did 9/11 change policing in New York, do you think, and around the country?
Sure. It changed us radically. And at the time, it was a mayoral primary, and Mayor Bloomberg came into office directly thereafter, brought Ray Kelly on board, and Commissioner Kelly built one of the greatest counterterrorism forces that any police department has, coupling off with FBI, with the JTTF. So we're a much, much stronger place than we were back then. We know how to combat it. We know we have assets throughout the world. So it changed us radically. We had a whole new bureau, the Intelligence Bureau and the Counterterrorism Bureau. to fight this, so preparedness. So anytime anything happens in the world, we adapt our strategies towards that event and prepare in those regards. We never did any of that before that because it really wasn't the threat it was, even after 93, when there was that one incident with the bomb. So it changes dramatically. In my time as chief of detectives, we had 3 terrorist incidents, but nothing of the magnitude that this is.
And Josh, we changed a lot about national security. We talked about the Homeland Security Department, the TSA, the no-fly list, and of course the war in Afghanistan. Do you think at the end of all this, are we safer now than we were 20 years ago?
I think it's the toughest answer to give, which is yes, but. Right? We are, in fact, safer. Clearly, air travel is more secure, right? It used to be that you could go right to the gate without a boarding pass. And who knows if they would catch anything. And obviously, the attackers on 9/11 got through security with box cutters. That would never happen these days. But are we more secure? It remains to be seen. Certainly, the war in Afghanistan destroyed al-Qaeda. So as Chief Boyce just said, there really is no chance for al-Qaeda to launch another 9/11 scale attack from Afghanistan. But there are people that are still plotting things. And, the war in Iraq helped create ISIS. So there's a threat at home. And then the writ large issue is really the fact that 20 years after 9/11, the FBI director keeps saying to Congress and to the American public, the biggest threat the American public is facing today from terrorism is the risk of homegrown terrorism, domestic terrorism, white supremacists, and what happens when you have such a terrible, toxic discourse going on in our country.
You don't need to get on a plane for that, Terry.
No, you don't. It's here as well, but security has become really a responsibility of each one of us. If someone walks up to an air ticket counter, wants to pay $5,000 in cash for a one-way ticket, that person's going to get questioned in a way they wouldn't before. But Bob, turning to what is happening today for the survivors, it's now believed more people have died from 9/11 related health issues than were killed in the attacks themselves. So you just talked about being able to taste that in the air down on the pile. What challenges do first responders face today, and what more needs to be done?
Terry, we just said goodbye to 2 very close friends of mine, a sergeant and a detective, who passed from cancer, and that's not an easy passing. Going through cancer, visiting them both at Sloan Kettering, and I expect to do the same going forward. It's a terrible ordeal for them, and it's rough on our individuals. You don't know if your number is going to be called. It's a terrible incident. So, but they know that, and each one I've talked to said, I wouldn't change my life at all. I was proud to be a cop. I was proud to help out that day. I was proud to work at the landfill, which recovered so much personal information, so much evidence for survivors' families. And they say they do it again. So these are some of the things that police officers talk about, first responders, firemen who are in the same situation. Other agencies besides law enforcement and fire department as well had sacrifices that day. People died. So I look at now, and my issue now is that the next generation realizes that we're in a dangerous world. This could happen again. Perhaps not on this scale, but I don't know. There's other issues there. A whole generation doesn't remember this. So they have to be taught. They have to understand the grasp of world events impact here on an international city like New York is.
And that is part of the reason why we're here today. Bob Boyce and Josh Margolin, thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. September 11th, 2001 was also a solemn day for the families of the 40 passengers on Flight 93, where hero passengers and crew stopped the 4th hijacked plane that day before it could hit another target, likely the U.S. Congress. The plane crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. No one survived. Our Juju Chang spoke with the mother and brother of Cece Lyles, one of the flight attendants on board. And Juju joins me now in Shanksville. Hi, Juju.
Terry, you may remember that Flight 93 was delayed in taking off, which is why when the hijacking happened on board, passengers and crew started calling family and loved ones. They quickly understood what was happening at the World Trade Center and at the Pentagon with the other planes. So they took a vote, and they voted to fight back, to stop the hijackers from attacking yet another symbol of America. They weren't just fighting for their lives, they were fighting for their country. And that's the bravery and the courage that we celebrate here in Western Pennsylvania. And we spent time with one of the flight attendants' family, Cece Lyles. They come back year after year to celebrate her life.
When we have this memorial, It is very important to me and my family that Cece be represented and that we know and that people know that she's in our heart and she'll always be in our heart. It's just the memory. I mean, you got to be here to say, that's my people. That's my daughter. That's my niece. That's my sister, you know, to make sure, you know, we are remembering her and honoring her.
Cece's family will be joining 39 others tonight in a special lantern ceremony, one placed in front of each of the 40 marble slabs inscribed with the name of a hero. Now, tomorrow morning, they'll be joined by dignitaries, including former President George Bush, Vice President Kamala Harris, and President Biden, all uniting with the families and taking that hallowed walk onto the field with one goal: to keep the memories and their heroism alive. Terry?
Juju Chang in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Thanks for that. And coming up, attacks by al-Qaeda terrorists 2 decades ago continue to fuel anti-Muslim sentiment here in the United States. We're going to break down where we stand now and how far things still have to go. Stay with us. Welcome back. They're the footprint of where the World Trade Center towers once stood. The 9/11 attacks by al-Qaeda terrorists 2 decades ago fueled anti-Muslim sentiment here in the United States and in the world, with an effect that is still very visible, very palpable today. Muslim Americans were detained in airports and placed on watch lists as the rise of Islamophobia opened the door to prejudice and hate crimes. According to a 2020 poll by the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding, Muslims at the airport have reported religious discrimination at a significantly higher rate than other religious minorities or the general public. 33% of Muslims also reported religious discrimination when applying for a job, also significantly higher than other groups. So to better understand how Islamophobia continues to influence the lives of our fellow Americans, Muslim Americans in the United States, all of us really, I want to welcome our panel of experts on the issue. Dalia Mogahed is Director of Research at the Institute for Social Policy and Understanding. Rez Bouyan is founder and president of World Without Hate and a post-9/11 hate crime survivor. And Robert Boyce, our colleague, former NYPD chief of detectives, is back with us as well. Thanks for joining us on this important issue as well. And Rez, let me just ask you about your story. You were attacked by a gunman just 10 days after the attacks on September 11th. What happened that day?
Well, I left New York City for Dallas, Texas 3 months before 9/11. And I was working in a friend's gas station 10 days after 9/11 terrorist attacks on September 21st. As I stood behind the counter, a customer walked in wearing a bandana, sunglasses, baseball cap, and holding a sort of double-barrel shotgun, pointing directly at my face. And from my previous robbery experience, I thought it would be robbery. I put all the money in the counter and I begged him for my life. And he asked me, "Where are you from?" And before I could say anything more than, "Excuse me," he pulled the trigger from point blank range, left me for dead on a cold concrete convenience store floor.
Oh. And what did you find out about this man? What would you tell people who face, you know, similar kinds of, not similar, but also face the hatred that you know, some Muslims have felt, many Muslims have felt?
Well, after his arrest, my attacker told the news media that he was hunting Arabs. And he said that what he did, most Americans wanted to do. They just didn't have the guts. He claimed he was a true American, a patriot. And he said specifically that there is no place for Muslims in America.
Now, Dalia, how do you think discrimination against Muslims has changed from right after 9/11 to now? Has it?
Thank you so much for having me. It has changed, but I think in ways that we wouldn't expect. One thing to note is that the number of hate crimes that were recorded by the FBI actually exceeded those right after 9/11 in 2016. So unfortunately, we haven't made the kind of progress we should. In fact, in some cases, we've gone the wrong direction, with 2016 exceeding 2001 in the number of anti-Muslim hate crimes.
And Bob, from the police perspective, obviously the country was desperately shocked and terrified, as was intended, after those attacks, and people wanted to know how to prevent the next one. So how did 9/11 change law enforcement? How they viewed Muslim Americans? Was their profiling based on race or religion more accepted? How do you read that whole controversy?
It was a very tough time, and it was really unfair. And we thought we had to do a better job with recruiting Muslim officers. We needed language capabilities we did not have, and we also needed a better liaison with community affairs as well. Reach out to certain neighborhoods. I live in Brooklyn. It's probably the most diverse area anywhere in the country, and every turn you make in different neighborhoods changed in a couple of blocks. We needed to reach out to make sure they know we're here. We're not going to tolerate it. We also increased the amount in our hate crimes task force. Like I said, language capabilities got a lot better. We're not there yet. It seems like it's an era of hate now, where you see all the social media messages around espousing this kind of hate, and it's baseless. But I think we're moving in the right direction, but we're never fast enough to get out in front of these things. And what they went through in the aftermath of the Muslim community after 9/11 was disgraceful. And it's tough to put into words exactly all the incidents we were taking in at that time.
And Bob, I do want to ask you, I covered, alas, a lot of terror attacks when I was chief foreign correspondent in Europe, was suffering terror attacks almost every month, it seemed. And I was there a lot, and we would go to the neighborhoods where the perpetrators were from, and we heard the same thing over and over from the Muslims in those neighborhoods, in London, in Belgium, in France, in Germany, across, that they had tried to reach out to authorities. And it struck me that the links between law enforcement and those communities are essential to keep us all safe.
They certainly are, Terry. And when something happens, especially on New York City subways, when all of the city comes together, it seems, on the ground, which was probably our biggest threat at the time. People moving about, dressing in religious garb, no matter what faith you followed. There was always the words and the constant banter from individuals who didn't know what they were talking about, for the most part, misidentifying people, saying a lot of things that turned into violence after that. So we had to increase our patrols. We had to treat each incident as if it was a major crime, and it was, almost like a homicide, to find out who they were, so we could stop it and nip it in the bud, and then find out on what social platforms they were getting their information from. That was important as well. So there was really a Herculean effort that was put forth. So these folks in these communities felt safer walking about American society. Not an easy thing to do. As I said, we're still moving forward towards the goal we want to go to, but I think we're in a better place. I think we have a lot more Muslim officers on board and working for us now, who are able to see trouble coming first, who are actually be able to go into neighborhoods and get information back, bring it back to us in headquarters, so we can deploy more resources into those areas that happen. Again, each incident is important. It has to be addressed immediately.
And Reyes, you say in some cases people who embraced anti-Muslim hate after 9/11, including the man who tried to kill you, were also victims of Islamophobia. Can you explain that?
Well, I was unknown to my attacker before the 9/11 terrorist attacks, but immediately after that, I was labeled as a lesser person, a threat, as a terrorist because of my physical appearance and also my perceived Islamic faith. And similarly, Muslims in Islam was fairly unknown to most Americans before 9/11, but immediately after, the religion and its followers were labeled as extremist, violent, and a threat to our society. And I would say that it's I was attacked because of my faith, but in the end, is the same faith that encouraged me to forgive my attacker and launch a global campaign to save his life from Texas death row. That ultimately led him to get to know me. And in the end, he called me brother and he said he loved me, turning his hate into love.
That is a remarkable story, a miracle, really, and of love, and admirable. And Dahlia, if I can turn to you, as we look forward, we hear Rice's story, and we hear the efforts that Bob Boyd has been talking about in police departments. What can be done practically for each one of us, for me, for all of us, to eliminate discrimination or reduce it in some way against Muslim Americans?
Thank you for the question. And I agree that Rice's story is indeed a miracle. And one thing he said about the man who tried to kill him was a victim of Islamophobia, it really rings true, because one thing we have to realize to fix discrimination is first that Islamophobia is a threat to every American, not because every American is Muslim, but because Islamophobia hurts democracy. Islamophobia makes us all less safe and less free because we are willing to forego our freedoms because we're afraid. Fear kills freedom. So we all have a vested interest in addressing this type of bigotry in our country. What can we do? We can educate ourselves. We can build relationships with people who are different from us. And most of all, we need to participate in our democracy and vote against discriminatory laws. The biggest perpetrator of Islamophobia are not individuals. It is the state. It is it's structural Islamophobia that discriminates against Muslims in institutional settings, not just on the street or in a grocery store.
It surely does, and let's get after it. Dahlia Mogahed, Rice Bouillon, Bob Boyce, thanks very much for a really interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you.
And that does it for us here on The Breakdown today. Thank you at home for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo.
And I'm Terry Moran. ABC News and ABC News Live will have full coverage marking the 20th anniversary of 9/11 tomorrow, beginning at 8 a.m. Up next, the latest episode of the ABC News Live original, The Longest Shadow, which takes a look at the legacy of the prison at Guantanamo Bay.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.